February marks LGBT plus History Month in the UK, a field of history that has been neglected despite its cultural significance. LGBT plus people have existed for the duration of human history, so it's not possible to cover it in its entirety in a brief video, or even in a month of them for that matter. However, it would be worth knowing about one of the many uprisings that contributed to the tumultuous inception of the Pride movement in the mid-20th century. It was in these acts of civil disobedience that an eclectic variety of identities converged to form a potent movement for change.
Far the most significant of these is the Stonewall Riot of June 28, 1969. The focal point occurred at the Stonewall Inn in Christopher Street, Greenwich Village, a place that has now been defined today as the cradle of the Pride movement. The Stonewall Inn was one of the many bars and saloons where LGBT plus patrons, dispossessed and disowned by family, employers and the law, gathered to find refuge. The existence of these bars was perilous, as the state liquor authority continually discriminated against such establishments by refusing to grant liquor licenses. For this reason, local mafia saw business potential and would often collaborate with the establishments for shared profit. Police raids were frequent and would follow a typical structure. Undercover officers would enter to evaluate the scene. A little while later, federal agents accompanied by a host of police officers would arrive. Lights would be turned up, doors bolted and barred, and a raid declared. All patrons were held captive. Those dressed as women were hauled into bathrooms to verify their gender, and those who were wearing clothes that weren't determined to fit their perceived gender, as was the case with drag queens, were detained for arrest, cross-dressing being a crime in a large proportion of states. They would then be carted off in police wagons, whilst other patrons filed out. Where gatherings were too large to be worth the effort of shutting down, intimidation tactics were used. As can be seen in this image, police photographers would photograph those entering. The message was clear. At any moment, they could release those images, potentially derailing the target's lives. However, Stonewall proved different. Initially, things progressed as usual. Police lined up outside, entering the building. They then held patrons captive inside the bar. Suspects were then detained inside a coat room, where they were allegedly frisked inappropriately. The irony of forcing them into the closet was not realised. However, the atmosphere was febrile and lacked the usual resignation. One closeted transgender woman, Mariah Ritter, described her biggest fear as getting arrested. Her second biggest fear was, quote, that her picture would be used in a newspaper or on a television report while still in her mother's dress. When the patrons were left outside on the street, they did not file away as usual. They remained, and grew progressively angrier as they saw their compatriots lined up into paddy wagons. Witnesses recall shouts of gay power and a spontaneous rendition of the civil rights song We Shall Overcome, both nods at the contemporary African-American civil rights movement. Some detainees performed for the crowd, one witness describing that, quote, wrists were limp, hair was primped, and reactions to the applause were classic, close quote. The patrons began to be merged in the collective sense of oppression. The actual cause of the riots is debated. The popular interpretation is that the influential African-American transgender activist Marsha P. Johnson threw a shot glass at a window in frustration whilst yelling, quote, I got my civil rights, close quote. However, this is debated, although Marsha P. Johnson was certainly present at the riots, eyewitness accounts indicating she dropped a brick onto a police windshield from a street lamp in an act of defiance. The most likely cause is when Stormy DeLavery, black butch lesbian drag king, whilst being arrested, called out to those on the streets, why don't you guys do something? Fittingly, the cause of arguably the most influential LGBT plus uprising in history was a call for others to not be bystanders to their oppression.
The conflict lasted around 3 days. Police reports at the time described it as a, quote, unusual occurrence. However, the impact was far wider reaching than the official language. The unifying effect of the riots, combining a multitude of identities in one night, kick-started the Pride movement. A flurry of Pride marches followed, the first being in the Christopher Street Liberation Parade a year to the day of the riot, and the first British march taking place in July 1972, stretching from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. The anniversary is the reason that June and parts of July OM Pride marches are frequently organised, representing the enduring cultural legacy of those two nights.